My fiancé mocked my fear of heights, then left me on a mountain trail as a joke. The morning air smelled like pine and frost as we unloaded backpacks from Dylan's SUV. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway, one last adventure before our wedding in August. His friends, Brandon and Cody, had convinced him that a mountain trail in Washington was the perfect spot to unplug and bond before marriage. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to spend time with him, but because I had a deep-rooted fear of heights. I told him countless times that ledges and cliffs made my knees buckle and my vision blur. But Dylan had rolled his eyes and said, "It's barely a hike. You'll be fine." His tone had that familiar edge of condescension, but I brushed it off, hoping he'd at least be a little considerate once we got there. As we started up the trail, I immediately felt the tightness in my chest grow. The narrow path snaked upward, flanked by steep drops and no railing in sight. I walked carefully, my fingers brushing against the cliff wall for balance. Dylan and the guys were ahead, laughing loudly, barely aware that I had slowed down. "You coming or are we leaving you in the forest?" Brandon shouted, chuckling as if this was all just playful teasing. I forced a smile and kept walking, but a pit was forming in my stomach. I tried to focus on my breathing and the crunch of gravel under my boots, but the altitude and uneven path kept whispering danger into my ears. I wasn't sure if the trip would bring us closer, or reveal something I hadn't wanted to see. As we ascended further into the trail, I noticed how different their energy was from mine. The guys were high-fiving each other, taking selfies near ledges, and mocking anyone who moved slower than them. I tried to laugh along when Dylan pointed at a squirrel and joked, "Even Ollie walks slower than that thing." But there was a sting in my chest that I couldn't shake. My fear wasn't something new. Dylan had known from the early days of our relationship that I hated roller coasters, glass elevators, even high balconies. He used to say it was cute how cautious I was. But now, just months away from becoming my husband, he seemed almost proud to ignore it. We reached a narrow segment of the path where the cliff dropped into a sharp valley below. I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move forward. Dylan looked back and groaned. "Seriously, Allison? You can literally see the path is safe. You're being dramatic." I didn't respond. My knees trembled, and my palms were slick with sweat. He turned back to the group and said, loud enough for me to hear, "Maybe she should have just stayed at the lodge and worked on the seating chart." Brandon laughed. "You sure she's ready for marriage, bro?" I couldn't tell what hurt more, the drop beneath me or the way Dylan smiled at their cruelty like it was some kind of team sport. As we sat for lunch near a plateau with panoramic views, I stayed close to the rock wall, unwilling to sit near the cliff's edge like the rest of them. Dylan tossed me a granola bar and said, "Here, to keep your strength up. You'll need it to survive the terror of a 5-foot drop." Brandon and Cody laughed again, this time clinking their beer cans in celebration of the joke. I gave a tight smile, biting into the bar slowly, not trusting my voice. I was beginning to notice the pattern, the sarcasm, the subtle digs, the way Dylan used humor to mask his indifference. He wasn't concerned about my fear. He thought it was a weakness I needed to tough out. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the path, we continued climbing. The trail became more rugged and twisted along sharp turns. At one bend, I froze. The drop was steep, and the trail was barely 2 feet wide. "Dylan," I said quietly, "I can't do this part. I need a minute." Instead of helping, he looked back and shook his head, a grin playing on his lips. "You'll be fine. Just pretend you're walking the aisle, only with better scenery." Cody burst out laughing. "Yeah, and fewer cold feet." I felt my face flush with heat and humiliation. I wasn't a joke. I was scared, and the man I was supposed to marry had no intention of understanding that. What happened next unfolded so quickly and casually that it felt unreal. Dylan turned to his friends and said, "Let's do it. She'll catch up." Brandon looked confused at first, but then his face lit up with mischief. "You serious?" Dylan nodded, his voice light but pointed. Yeah. Let's see how she handles it. She's always talking about being independent. I took a step forward, panic rising. Wait, what do you mean? But they were already moving, laughter echoing as they picked up their pace. I tried to keep up, but the path was too narrow, too steep, and my legs were paralyzed by fear. Within seconds, they disappeared around a bend, their laughter fading into the rustle of leaves and distant wind. I stood frozen, my mouth still open from the sentence I hadn't finished. I called Dylan's name once, then again. No response. Just the sound of wind in the trees and a few birds fluttering nearby. My hands were shaking. I checked my phone, no signal. My heart pounded in my ears. Was this a prank? Was he going to jump out and say gotcha like he always did when he teased me? But the silence stretched longer and longer. My chest tightened as the truth settled in. He wasn't coming back. Not yet, maybe not at all. Dylan had left me alone, mid-hike, on a trail I didn't know, because he thought it would be funny. Because humiliating me had become entertainment. I don't know how long I stood there, unable to move. My legs refused to cooperate, and every glance over the cliffside pulled my stomach into knots. I tried yelling again, but even my own voice felt thin and useless in the vastness of the mountain. Eventually, I sank down onto a rock, holding my knees to my chest. A cold sweat clung to my back, despite the warmth of the sun. I imagined Dylan and his friends at the summit, drinking beers, high-fiving each other for the hilarious prank. I imagined the smug grin on Dylan's face when he came back and told me to lighten up. But something in me started to shift, slowly, painfully, like a wire pulled too tight for too long finally snapping. The hours crept by. Shadows lengthened, and the trail around me grew darker and less inviting. I rationed the half bottle of water I had left and bit into the granola bar I had saved. My fingers trembled with every movement. I thought about texting someone, my mom, maybe, but remembered that Dylan had offered to carry my phone earlier for safety. It was still in his backpack. I was truly alone. With no other option, I turned back down the trail, one foot in front of the other, hugging the mountain wall for stability. Every step was agony. But I kept walking, even when my legs buckled slightly, even when my breath caught in fear. I walked because I had to. Not because I believed someone was coming. Because no one was. The sky began to shift into hues of deep orange and purple, signaling the arrival of night. My body ached from tension and fatigue, and my legs were stiff from gripping the narrow path so tightly. I had descended only a fraction of the way, and my heart thumped wildly at every minor slip. At a wider spot on the trail, I paused and sat against a boulder, pulling my jacket tighter. My lips were dry, and my throat was beginning to hurt. I reached instinctively for my phone again, forgetting it wasn't with me. A sob escaped before I could stop it. I was stranded on a mountainside at dusk, abandoned by the person who had vowed to protect me. A breeze swept through the trees, rustling the leaves in a way that sounded too much like footsteps. My eyes darted around, hoping, maybe praying, that Dylan would appear, holding his hands up in apology, laughing it off like he always did. But there was no sign of him or his friends. The sounds were only the wind, and the rustle of some small animal deeper in the brush. I tried to stay calm, to think logically, to remember what I'd read once in a travel blog about staying safe when lost in nature. Find a flat area. Stay put. But even the flat spots felt treacherous here, edged with cliffs and fading light. My only option was to keep moving, slowly, carefully, and hope that the trail would eventually lead somewhere safer than this. I didn't hear the footsteps until they were close. My ears were so attuned to every snap of a twig that it took a moment to register the deliberate pace of someone approaching. I turned my head sharply, startled. A man emerged from the bend in the trail, holding a walking stick and wearing a weathered gray jacket. He looked to be in his late 30s, with a calm, weathered face and eyes that immediately scanned mine with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice steady but gentle. My words caught in my throat. Relief and disbelief collided all at once. I nodded too quickly, then shook my head. He crouched a few feet away, giving me space but clearly not planning to leave. "I'm Theo," he said, as if trying to ground me with something solid. "Do you need help?" I exhaled shakily, then managed to speak. "My fiancé left me. I think as a joke, I'm not sure." I got scared and fell behind. "He didn't come back." I didn't realize I was crying until my vision blurred again. Theo's eyes darkened slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "Let's get you off this trail," he said. "There's a rest area an hour down. You shouldn't be out here alone." He didn't press for more, and I didn't offer. For now, I just followed. The rest stop was a modest wooden shelter built for overnight hikers, one of those single-wall cabins with 3 open sides and a small stone fire pit nearby. Theo led me inside and began arranging his things while I sat numbly on a log, watching his hands move. He offered me a protein bar and his water flask, which I took gratefully. When he finally sat down across from me, silence settled like a soft blanket between us. "Want to tell me what happened?" he asked gently. My throat tightened, but something about his calm demeanor made the words begin to fall out in pieces. I told him about Dylan. About the hike. About the jokes, the teasing, the moment he turned and left. Theo didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch or look incredulous. He just listened, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he only said, "That's not a joke. That's cruelty." I blinked, surprised by the clarity of his response. No sugarcoating, no excuses. Just truth. It made something shift inside me. Until that moment, I had been trying to rationalize Dylan's actions, telling myself I overreacted, that maybe I misunderstood. But hearing it from a stranger, plainly and without hesitation, made the weight of it real. In the morning, the mountains were quiet and silver with mist. My body felt like it had aged 10 years overnight, sore in places I never knew could ache. Theo had started a small fire and was boiling water for instant coffee. I reached for my phone again, knowing what I'd find. Still no signal. Still no message from Dylan. The thought made my stomach turn. Even if he thought it was a joke, he hadn't checked on me. Not even once. I remembered the way he used to tell me I was too sensitive whenever I cried during arguments, the way he rolled his eyes when I asked for reassurance instead of sarcasm. Theo caught my expression and handed me the tin mug. Still nothing? I shook my head. He hasn't even tried. My voice cracked on the last word, and I quickly took a sip to cover it. Theo didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, almost carefully, he said, "You don't look like someone anyone should leave behind." I didn't respond, but the words stayed with me. All morning, as we began the descent, I carried that sentence with me like armor. I didn't know who I was outside of Dylan's shadow, but I was beginning to wonder what it would feel like to find out. That night, we stayed at a small lodge nestled near the edge of the forest. It was more rustic than luxurious, worn quilts, wooden beams, and a fireplace that crackled softly through the night. After a hot shower and a simple meal, I found myself staring into the fire, replaying everything. Every memory with Dylan felt different now, like seeing an old photo and noticing for the first time how unhappy you looked. I remembered birthdays where he forgot the gift, but made me feel guilty for caring. Vacations where he flirted openly with waitresses and called it harmless. Jokes at my expense that no one else laughed at but him. Theo sat across from me again, quietly sipping tea. We didn't talk much, and that was somehow more comforting than any conversation. I glanced at the phone on the side table again, finally powered on and connected to Wi-Fi. A wave of dread washed over me as I opened the messaging app. No texts. No calls. No notifications. Just silence. I felt something inside me fold in half, then dissolve. Not sadness. Not even rage. Just clarity. He didn't forget. He didn't lose signal. He chose not to look for me. That night, I slept with a heaviness I couldn't shake. But in my dreams, I was already walking away. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time, staring at my reflection. My face was sunburned in patches, lips chapped, hair tangled at the ends. But it wasn't my appearance that held me captive. It was the ring on my finger, sleek, elegant, and cold. Dylan had proposed with it at a fancy rooftop dinner, after making a crude joke about finally giving in. Even then, I'd felt a twinge of doubt, but convinced myself that love wasn't about grand gestures. I slipped the ring off slowly, as if afraid it might scream. My hand felt lighter, strangely freer. I placed it in the drawer beside the bed without ceremony. Downstairs, the lodge owner offered me toast and coffee, speaking in a mix of English and local dialect. Theo sat by the window, his eyes meeting mine briefly before returning to his notebook. The simplicity of the moment contrasted starkly with the chaos I had left behind. No one was asking me to explain, to justify, to be anything other than what I was. And somehow, that quiet acceptance made everything louder inside me. The ring wasn't just a symbol of engagement, it had become the weight of a relationship that had slowly erased me. Leaving it behind felt less like giving up and more like finally choosing myself. Over breakfast, I found myself telling Theo more than I intended. About how I gave up my own architectural career to help Dylan build his consultancy brand. About the countless times I designed pitch decks, ran errands, kept the fridge stocked, arranged social events, all so he could focus. I told him how people saw us at dinners and thought I was lucky to have a man like him, successful and charming. But behind closed doors, I had gradually become less of a partner and more of an assistant. I hadn't picked up a pencil to sketch in nearly a year. My days were filled with favors, not dreams. Theo listened quietly, his brow furrowed in thought. When I paused, he finally said, "You're not the only one. A lot of smart women shrink themselves for men who ask them to. The difference is whether you stay shrunk." His words lingered as we walked around the quiet village, each step echoing with the truth I didn't want to face. I'd built a life that looked right from the outside but was hollow within. Dylan never had to force me to abandon my path. He just convinced me it didn't matter. I hadn't just lost myself on that mountain trail. I'd been lost for years. The trail had only made it obvious. Later that day, the lodge owner, a woman named Amara, asked if I wanted to join her in tending the small herb garden behind the kitchen. I said yes without thinking, eager to move, to do something with my hands. We spent the afternoon planting rosemary and trimming lavender. She didn't ask about my past or why I was here. She just offered gloves, tools, and gentle company. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was healing. Occasionally, she'd glance at me and smile, as if to say, "I don't need your story to see you." That kind of wordless empathy was something I hadn't felt in years. Later, she brought out old sketchbooks and asked if I wanted to use them. I blinked, unsure how she knew I needed them. She shrugged when I asked. "People carry things in their faces," she said. "I see you're ready to carry something else." I took the book with a lump in my throat, retreating to the porch and sketching the garden's edges until the light faded. My hands were stiff, unpracticed, but the lines flowed again. For the first time in months, I felt more than broken. I felt like a woman with something to rebuild. Not just her future. Herself. The next morning, Theo invited me for a short walk through a trail on the edge of the village, nothing steep, he promised. I hesitated. Just hearing the word trail made my stomach twist. But something in his voice made me trust that he meant it. We followed a narrow dirt path through olive trees and dry grass, the early sun warming our backs. The trail curved gently, nothing like the mountain's edge that still haunted my thoughts. My heart sped up anyway, every small rise triggering buried fear. Theo didn't rush me. He walked at my pace, occasionally pointing out birds or wildflowers. Halfway through, we came to a small rise with a view of the valley. It wasn't high, but my body reacted as if it were. My breath quickened, and I froze. Theo didn't speak. He just stood nearby, silent and grounded. After a long moment, I took one step forward. Then another. My hands trembled, but I made it to the rock ledge and sat. The view was breathtaking: warm stone villages, olive fields, and distant hills blurring into gold. "See?" Theo said gently, not smiling, just present. "It's still beautiful. Even when it scares you." I nodded, the tears coming not from fear, but from relief. I'd faced the edge again. And this time, I hadn't turned back. Back at the lodge, I found myself sketching furiously, details of the valley, the kitchen garden, the way Amara's hands moved when she kneaded dough. My fingers hurt, but in the best way. Theo watched from a distance, not intruding, just occasionally nodding when I caught his eye. That night, over a modest dinner, Amara offered me a small canvas and a box of her son's old watercolor paints. "They've been sitting for too long," she said. "Maybe they were waiting for you." I didn't know how to thank her, so I just whispered, "I'll do something with them. I promise." That night, alone in the quiet room, I painted for the first time in over 2 years. The strokes weren't perfect, and the colors bled too quickly, but I didn't care. Each mark felt like breath returning to lungs that had been tight for far too long. I wasn't thinking about Dylan. I wasn't wondering if he'd text or apologize. For the first time since the hike, he didn't live in my thoughts. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want closure. I wanted something entirely different now, something rooted in soil, in color, in stillness. And maybe, in this small village, I was starting to find it. It happened late in the evening. I was brushing off paint from my fingers when my phone vibrated on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in days: Dylan. My heart skipped, not from hope, but from the sudden reminder of everything I had escaped. I hesitated before opening the message. "Hey, that hike thing got out of hand. You didn't need to disappear. Come back already. We need to talk." I read it twice. No apology. No concern. Just the same tone he always used when he wanted to reset the conversation without taking any blame. I sat down, staring at the screen. I thought of how I cried myself to sleep in a wooden shelter, dehydrated and shaking. How Theo had found me and led me back, not because he owed me anything, but because he simply cared. And then there was Dylan, who thought everything could be fixed with a dismissive sentence. I placed the phone face down. I wouldn't respond. Not now. Maybe not ever. For the first time, I realized that not answering wasn't running away, it was finally standing still in my own truth. The next morning, Amara mentioned the bus schedule without prompting, gently sliding a handwritten note across the table. "Just in case you decide to go back," she said. I looked at the slip of paper, its soft ink spelling out routes that would take me to the airport, to the city, to home, if that word still applied. Theo caught my eye from across the room but didn't interfere. The choice was mine. I took the paper and folded it into my journal without comment. But the weight of that decision sat on my chest all day like a stone. I wandered into the orchard after lunch, my sketchbook tucked under one arm. Sitting beneath an old olive tree, I flipped through pages filled with my new life, brushes, buildings, faces I had grown to care about. A bus ride back to Dylan meant giving all this up again. But more than that, it meant returning to someone who had shown me exactly how little he valued me. I didn't need anyone to tell me what to do. The truth had already settled in my bones. I wouldn't be using that bus ticket. I'd find another path forward, one where I wasn't an afterthought. Theo suggested one more hike. A short one, he promised. Different trail. Better view. "It's not steep," he added, and something about his tone made me believe him. I agreed without hesitation this time. The path was gentle, winding through wildflowers and tall grass that swayed in the breeze. It wasn't just the terrain that was easier, it was my breathing, my pace, my silence. For the first time, my body didn't protest as we climbed. At the summit, there was no cliff, no danger. Just an open expanse that made me feel small in the most peaceful way. I looked out at the landscape and felt something settle deep in my chest. I wasn't the woman who had been left behind anymore. I was the woman who had made it here on her own. When I turned to Theo, he didn't say anything grand or sentimental. He just nodded, as if he saw the shift in me without needing it explained. I smiled, not for him, but for me. This wasn't a victory march. It was a quiet return to something I'd nearly forgotten, my own strength. That evening, back at the lodge, I brought out my portfolio. The one I hadn't touched in over a year. It was still filled with early concept sketches, half-finished ideas, dreams I had set aside to plan someone else's life. I laid them out across the floor of my room, page by page. Some made me cringe, they felt dated, immature. But others sparked something deep in me. I didn't want to erase the past. I just wanted to build from it. So I began again. I sharpened a pencil and sketched new lines over the old ones. Not corrections, evolutions. Later, Theo passed by my door and noticed the papers. "You've got something real there," he said. "I hope you keep going." I didn't know how to reply at first. I'd grown used to minimizing my work, calling it a hobby or just something I do when I have time. But I looked down at my hands, smudged with graphite, muscles sore, and realized I had never felt more alive. "I will," I said. "This time, I won't stop." And I meant it. Over the next few days, word spread in the village that I was an architect. Amara's cousin asked if I could sketch ideas for a rooftop garden she wanted to build. A local artisan brought a coffee table and asked if I could redesign the legs. I hadn't realized how starved I was for creative purpose until people began placing their trust in my hands. It wasn't about money or prestige. It was about being seen for something more than what I had sacrificed. The feeling was intoxicating, but also grounding. One afternoon, Theo joined me as I measured the dimensions of a courtyard. He watched without interfering, occasionally asking thoughtful questions. I realized then that this was what support looked like, not taking over, not diminishing, just walking beside me. "You light up when you talk about this," he said quietly. I paused, looking up from the notebook. "I used to. Before. Now I'm just remembering how." He smiled, and for the first time since everything happened, I let myself laugh. A real laugh, from somewhere deeper than fear or sadness. It echoed through the courtyard like music. One evening, after a long day spent sketching redesigns for the village bakery's front patio, Amara approached me with an unexpected question. "Have you thought about staying?" she asked, her tone careful but sincere. "The old guest house next door needs love. It's small, but it has good bones. Could be something beautiful, with the right hands." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "Are you offering?" She nodded, gently. "A space. A fresh start. Not charity, just possibility." My heart fluttered in a way I hadn't felt in years. The idea terrified and excited me all at once. I spent the night pacing the room, staring out the window into the darkened hills. The guest house wasn't just a building, it was a choice. To reclaim my profession, to rebuild without Dylan, to root myself somewhere that had shown me kindness without obligation. When morning came, I gave Amara my answer. "Yes. I'll stay. I don't know for how long, but I'll try." Her smile was all the confirmation I needed. No contracts. No expectations. Just trust. And a key placed softly into my hand. 3 days later, I heard a voice I hadn't expected, sharp, too familiar, echoing down the narrow stone path near the cafe. "Allison?" My blood ran cold. I turned and saw him. Dylan. Dressed in hiking gear, sunglasses perched on his head, that same practiced smirk on his face. You weren't exactly easy to find, he said, as if that were something charming. My mouth went dry. I hadn't prepared for this. I thought I might never see him again, and now here he was, standing in the middle of this quiet village like he belonged. He stepped closer, ignoring my stillness. Look, I messed up. Okay? The hike, the jokes, it got out of hand. The guys said it was supposed to be funny. I stared at him, silent. No apology could erase what he had done. But he didn't seem to realize that. He kept talking, listing reasons, shifting blame. You disappeared, and that made things worse. I was worried. But come on, don't you think you overreacted a little? That was it. The sentence that clarified everything. Even now, he wasn't sorry. He was inconvenienced. My disappearance had hurt his image, not his heart. Amara, unaware of the tension, invited Dylan to dinner that evening. He accepted with a casual nod, assuming hospitality meant forgiveness. At the table, he spoke loudly, trying to charm everyone. She's always been strong-willed, he said, gesturing to me. But you know how sensitive she gets when things don't go her way. My fork paused midair. Theo, seated across from him, leaned forward slightly. Funny, he said, tone calm but unmistakably firm. I don't see her that way at all. Dylan blinked, caught off guard by the challenge. Excuse me? Theo didn't raise his voice. I see someone who walked herself down a mountain, dehydrated and scared, because the person who promised to care for her thought it would be amusing to abandon her. And now that same person's calling her dramatic. The table went silent. Amara's hand paused over the bread basket. Dylan flushed but tried to laugh it off. Whoa, okay. You clearly have your version of things. I put down my fork. No, he has the truth, I said quietly. And I'm done pretending otherwise. After dinner, Dylan cornered me near the back garden. So this is it? You're staying here now? With them? His voice was tight, laced with something darker than confusion. You're throwing everything away over one bad moment? I turned to face him fully. No. I'm letting go of everything I built around someone who didn't know how to hold it. His jaw clenched, his hands curling slightly. I made a mistake. You just vanished. That's not fair either. My voice didn't shake this time. You didn't just leave me on a trail. You left me for years. Every time you dismissed me. Every time you made me doubt my instincts, my worth, my fear. That wasn't one mistake, it was a pattern. And I let it happen. His shoulders fell, deflated. So what now? I looked him in the eyes. Now, I live my life. Without you in it. And with that, I turned away, not dramatically, not for effect, but with the quiet strength of someone who had finally, fully chosen herself. Dylan left the next morning without a word. No dramatic farewell. No parting insults. Just the sound of his rental car's engine disappearing down the hill. I watched from the window, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. The past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer held me hostage. That chapter was closed, not burned in anger, but folded away like a book I'd outgrown. Theo passed by the window and caught my gaze. He didn't ask what had happened. He just nodded. That was enough. Later, I found the ring Dylan had once given me, still tucked into the drawer where I'd left it. I walked it down to the small post office in the village and mailed it back to his address. No note. No explanation. Just a clean return. On the way back, I passed the old guest house again. The shutters were still cracked, the garden overgrown. But I could already see the lines of transformation in my mind. That night, with stars burning overhead, I sat by the window of my new room and whispered to myself, "You came back to life." And I believed it. The first morning after Dylan left, I woke up before sunrise. I pulled on my boots and walked through the village in silence, the world still cloaked in soft indigo. Without telling anyone, I returned to the lower trail, the place where I had once stood paralyzed, unable to breathe. But now I walked it alone, with steady steps. The cliffs hadn't changed, but I had. My hands no longer trembled as I pressed them to the rocks. I paused at the exact point where I had once frozen, eyes wide with panic. I stood there now, breathing deeply, not to prove anything, but to reclaim something. I didn't climb higher. I didn't need to. I sat quietly on a flat stone ledge, watching the light spill across the valley, brushing the world in gold. I whispered a quiet thank you to the girl I had been, that frightened, humiliated version of myself who had kept walking even when no one came back. She had gotten me here. And now, sitting on the same mountain that once terrified me, I felt no fear. Only peace. And a deep, steady pride that couldn't be shaken. When I returned, Theo was in the workshop space next to the guest house, sanding an old bench. He looked up and smiled, not a question in his eyes, only recognition. Later that afternoon, over fresh bread and olives, he made a quiet offer. "I know a few people who've been wanting to restore some of the old villas in the region," he said. "They could use someone with your eye." I blinked. "You want me to stay?" He shrugged. "Only if you want to. But I've seen what you can build. And I think this place needs more of that." I smiled, slow and certain. "Then let's do it. Let's build something." It wasn't a romantic confession. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a partnership. Two people offering respect, space, and opportunity, not control or rescue. I didn't need to be saved. I had already saved myself. But I welcomed the idea of building beside someone who saw me not as an extension of himself, but as a whole person with her own plans. And dreams. A week later, a letter arrived from my mother. The envelope was soft from travel, the handwriting immediately familiar. Inside, she wrote, "At first I was worried. You disappeared, and I didn't know what to think. But now I see you're more present than you've ever been. I looked at your latest drawings online. Yes, Theo helped me find them. I don't know this version of you yet, but I want to. She looks alive." I read the letter 3 times before folding it gently and tucking it into my journal. It wasn't just about art or location. My mother saw me in a way she hadn't in years, maybe because, finally, I saw myself. I wasn't hiding behind Dylan's goals anymore. I wasn't editing myself to avoid conflict. I was honest. Imperfect. Learning. And in that honesty, I had reconnected with the people who mattered, and let go of those who never really had my best interest at heart. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building a future that fit me. Months later, I led a group of travelers through one of the safer hiking paths near the village, part of a community program Theo and I had launched together. Among them was a young woman who hesitated at a narrow bend. I walked beside her, calm, patient. "I used to hate these cliffs," I told her with a smile. "I once got stranded on one." Her eyes widened. "What happened?" I paused and looked out over the valley. "Someone left me there. But that moment gave me my life back." She nodded, encouraged, and took a step forward. As we reached the clearing, the others joined, laughter echoing through the trees. I stayed behind for a moment longer, turning to look at the trail. I didn't feel bitterness anymore. That path, cruel as it had once been, had become the turning point I never saw coming. I wasn't grateful for the pain, but I was grateful for what came after. Strength, clarity, a new path, one entirely my own. That evening, from the window of the guest house, now transformed into a small studio filled with drawings, ceramics, and light, I watched the sky turn from coral to deep blue. My hands were stained with paint and charcoal, my table cluttered with new commissions from local artisans. I didn't need validation from a man who thought leaving me behind was funny. I had validation in every project I finished, every smile from a neighbor, every line that came from my own imagination. I had once thought humiliation was the end of everything, the collapse of a life I worked so hard to build. But now I knew better. That humiliation had become the foundation for something far stronger. Not because someone rescued me, but because I stood up, walked forward, and chose to rebuild. With care. With intention. With love, not the kind that seeks to own, but the kind that simply holds space. And in that space, I finally grew.